The wire cages of the transit camp in Detroit offered no view of the city beyond the chain link and the guards. For these new arrivals, captured in the North African desert and the hills of Tunisia, America was an abstraction, a distant industrial giant they had been told was soft, decadent, and ill-prepared for war. As they were loaded onto trucks under heavy guard on a chill morning in early 1944, they expected another prison compound, perhaps with more concrete and colder barracks. The convoy did not head to the outskirts, however. It rolled into the heart of the industrial landscape, past miles of worker housing and rail yards, until a complex of staggering scale materialized on the horizon. This was the River Rouge plant of the Ford Motor Company, a city within a city, a monument to the very industrial might their propaganda had dismissed. A low murmur went through the prisoners as they saw it, a mixture of confusion and dawning disbelief. They were not being taken to a prison near the factory. They were being driven through its gates. The scale was incomprehensible. Sprawling over 15 square miles along the riverbank, Rouge was a fully integrated universe of production, where docks unloaded Great Lakes freighters directly into the blast furnaces, whose smoke plumed against the gray Michigan sky. The steel was forged, rolled, and stamped on site, moving through a labyrinth of connected buildings on miles of conveyor systems. The sound was a constant, deafening symphony of industry, the shriek of metal, the deep thrum of generators, the hiss of steam, and the clatter of endless assembly lines. To the German prisoners, many of whom came from a homeland where industry was revered, but fragmented, and now buckling under Allied bombing, the sight was a profound psychological shock. This was not a factory. It was the beating heart of a machine they had profoundly underestimated. They saw a workforce of thousands, men and women, black and white, moving with a purpose that belied the lazy caricatures of American weakness they had been fed. The guards marched them not to a secluded compound, but directly into one of the vast, cathedral-like manufacturing buildings, their boots echoing on the concrete floor. Their purpose here was labor, as dictated by the Geneva Convention for Enlisted Prisoners. But the context was meticulously crafted. They were set to work on non-work critical tasks: scrap sorting, warehouse organization, groundskeeping within this temple of production. This was deliberate. They were to be witnesses. As they sorted scrap metal, they watched new B-2 for Liberator bomber fuselages, produced at the nearby Willow Run plant, being fitted with engines. As they loaded crates, they saw endless rows of new Jeep engines, tank parts, and munitions being prepared for shipment. The work rhythm was relentless, the output staggering. One prisoner, a former panzer mechanic from the Afrika Korps, later confessed in a letter home, censored, but revealing in its awe, that he had seen more engines produced in a single shift at Rouge than his entire tank battalion had received in a year of fighting. The noise, the pace, the sheer coordination of it all chipped away at their doctrinal certainty. They'd been told the war of material was a crude, un-German form of warfare. Here they saw its awesome, crushing reality. The most profound moments came during shift changes and in the cafeteria. The prisoners in their marked uniforms ate alongside American civilian workers. There was no fraternization, but there was observation. They saw the workers, including women, doing heavy industrial jobs their own ideology deemed unfit, buying war bonds from kiosks in the plant. They heard casual conversations about rationing, not as complaints of deprivation, but as shared sacrifice. They saw the absence of the party officials and political overseers that permeated their own factories. The efficiency here seemed born of a different ethos, one of collective, voluntary effort. A young German corporal, captured at Kasserine Pass, stared one day at a line of workers collecting paychecks. He turned to a fellow prisoner, his voice barely audible over the din, and said, "They are not slaves. They are paid. They are building the weapons that will kill our brothers." This was the silent, devastating climax of their detention. The realization that they were not just prisoners of the American army, but prisoners of a system far more resilient, productive, and ultimately formidable than they had ever imagined. The front line was thousands of miles away, but in the roar of the Rouge plant, they heard the approaching collapse of the Third Reich. They returned each evening to their barbed wire enclosures, but the mental prison of Nazi propaganda had been permanently breached. The evidence was in the sky, two contrails of training aircraft, unmolested by any Luftwaffe. The war for them was no longer about battlefield tactics or the charisma of commanders. It had been reduced to a simple, brutal equation of production witnessed firsthand. They had seen the unending river of steel, and they knew, with the grim certainty of practical men, that no amount of will or racial dogma could stem it. Their own sense of military pride remained, but it was now isolated, cut off from the sustaining myth of national superiority. They would sit in their barracks, the distant glow and rumble of the all-night shift, a constant reminder knowing that with every engine tested and every crate loaded, the war was moving irrevocably towards a conclusion they had just been granted the terrible privilege to foresee. The factory floor had become the most effective interrogation room of all. They had confessed its truth to themselves in silence.